Hey everyone, CoolKid here. Back in 2022, Warframe was graced with its least controversial update, Angels of the Zariman. Among many other things, this update gave us 3 new game modes: Void Flood, Void Cascade, and Void Armageddon. Void Flood has essentially found its way into like 4 other game modes at this point, and Cascade is still very popular for farming arcanes, but Armageddon quickly faded into irrelevancy. I find that to be a real shame though, as the mode's unique tower defense spin was really cool if you ask me. So, while playing Armageddon back when it was new, I discovered that the mode's deployable turrets can be affected by buffs that normally affect allies. This includes stuff like haste motes, total eclipse, roar, shock trooper, and so on. This caused me to release a video titled Breaking Void Armageddon's Turrets, where I put together a strategy involving Wisp and total eclipse that buffed the turrets to steel path viability. In the nearly 4 years since that video's release, new items have been added, new synergies discovered, and the Helminth version of Eclipse got turbo-nerfed off the face of the Origin system. What I'm trying to say is that a lot has changed, and while the old video still holds some useful information, it's in dire need of an update. As such, I'm going to both re-evaluate the old strategy and put forward a new tactic that leverages some previously non-existent mechanics. To start though, I do need to explain how Void Armageddon works and what each turret does. None of this has changed in the time since the last video, so if you already know all of this stuff, jump to the timestamp on screen now. Still here? Alright, let's get into it. Void Armageddon is a defense-style mode exclusive to the Aura Works node on the Zariman. Your primary goal is to defend the kid-named Finger, and if Finger dies, then you'll be forced to extract, so make sure that doesn't happen. In terms of structure, the mode progresses through rounds, which are reward rotations, with each round containing 3 waves of enemies capped off by a mini-boss. At the start of any given round, 2 exodampers will spawn in rooms near the Eternal Finger, with these dampers acting as defense sub-objectives. Each time a wave of enemies spawns, they will spawn in the same area as one of the 2 exodampers, though the player has 40 seconds of grace to haul ass and set up. Each exodamper has an enemy buff tied to it, and if a damper dies, all enemies will receive its corresponding buff for the remainder of the round. If the currently targeted exodamper is dead and no players are within 100 meters of the finger, then said finger will also periodically take a small amount of damage. New exodampers are created at the start of each new round, and dampers that died in a previous round will not have their debuffs carried over to newly spawned enemies, though enemies that were alive before the round transitioned will retain their buffs. Something I want to note real quick is that the targeted exodamper can change even if there are still enemies attacking the previous one. This means that enemies can still attack exodampers that aren't the current defense target, and they can even slip past the player into the Fingers room, which is a massive pain in the ass. On the bright side, if not attacked for a brief period, both exodampers and the Finger will regenerate roughly 150 health per second, so they can recover from damage. After 3 waves of exodamper defense, a ravenous Void Angle will spawn, and it will rapidly make its way towards the Finger. Angles aren't the brightest though, and they often get stuck, but if enough time has passed, they'll straight up teleport to the Finger. If an angle finds itself in front of the Finger, it will start to rapidly consume it, which ultimately ends in mission failure. These angles are identical to their non-boss counterparts found in regular Zariman missions, but they only have 2 health bars instead of 3, and while feeding on the Finger, they won't fight back. Just nuke its health bar as fast as possible, and then prevent it from retreating into the void so it can heal. This update's 4 years old now, you all probably know how this works. Once you defeat the angle, it will drop a Void Plume Quill, grant an item from the mode's reward rotation, and start the next round. Now we're on to this mode's X Factor, and my favorite in-game drug, Argozene. Or Argozene. Argozene is a purple pickup that can be obtained in 2 ways. A free crate of 50 will spawn at the start of each wave in the same room as the targeted exodamper, and enemies also have a chance to drop a bundle of 10 on death. Up to 500 Argozene can be carried at once, and it's shared across teammates. This currency is used to construct 4 types of turrets, which can be done by interacting with orange holograms that spawn in fixed locations around the map. Each turret is completely invincible, and lasts for 2 minutes after being built, and as far as I'm aware, there's no way to prolong their duration. Also, as a pro tip, you can use the number keys to quickly build turrets while the construction menu is open. Alright, let's go over each turret type now. First up is the Bazooka, which is a Gatling gun turret that costs 40 lean and deals corrosive damage. It's got a decent fire rate and very impressive range, but it's only able to take on a single target at a time. The Bazooka's target acquisition is also pretty slow, so it struggles to switch between enemies. Still, its long range makes it great at cross-mapping enemies, and its high rate of fire is very effective for nullifier bubbles. Next up is the Pterodon, which costs 50 lean and fires chain lightning that deals magnetic damage, though it procs the electric status. This turret deals incredibly high damage, fires very quickly, and its chaining mechanic lets it tear through whole squads in one burst. Its main limiting factor, as you might expect, is its range, which is only about 15 meters. When placed in a close quarters choke point, the Pterodon really shines, but in more open areas, it struggles to reach its targets. The Coralizer is our third turret, costing 60 lean. It grabs nearby enemies with cold damage tendrils, pulling them in and slowing them. The damage of these tendrils is quite low, and strangely enough, they don't actually inflict cold procs, instead being a flat slow. The Coralizer is at its best when it's used to slow the enemy's advance or set up for other turrets, but its solo damage potential isn't very good. Our last turret is the Giotica, which costs 60 lean and fires laser-guided rockets. These rockets deal puncture damage on impact and spawn a growth similar to Proboscis Cernos that pulls in enemies before detonating. It packs a solid punch, but its fire rate and target acquisition are both incredibly slow. This means that misses are especially punishing, as the rockets fire pretty infrequently. On the bright side, this turret has quite a long range, so in open areas with few obstructions, it can take out crowds of enemies easily. So now that we're through each turret, it's time to talk about what we can use to enhance them. As I mentioned at the start of this video, several Warframe abilities can be used to buff the turrets, so long as they can buff allies. I do have a particular strategy I'm going to be focusing on in this video, but I want to do a quick rundown of all the options. Before that though, I need to mention a crucial piece of information. The turrets count as summons. This means that they can be buffed by the Summoner's Wrath aura, giving them a 75% universal faction damage buff. Arcane Kamisato doesn't seem to build stacks from turret kills, but Theorem Infection can be used to grant them elemental damage. If you don't know how the Theorem mods work, I'm not going to go into detail on them here, as I think they're really annoying to maintain, so I don't bother with them for this strategy. I'll link .thanda's video on the topic in the description if you're curious, as it does a great job explaining things. Alright, moving on to the abilities, the first one I want to discuss is Roar. Roar is a solid damage buff, being 50% on Rhino and 30% if subsumed via the Helminth. Roar does have its issues though, with the most obvious one being that it's not recastable. This can be fixed by using the Piercing Roar augment. Roar is also additive with the damage bonus from Summoner's Wrath, so while it's still a big bump in damage, we can go higher by using different types of damage buffs. Eclipse was the star of the show in the first video, using the Total Eclipse augment to grant its damage buff to nearby turrets. Now though, well, it got nuked into a 30% damage buff when applied via the Helminth, so it's only really worth using if you're playing Mirage. On the bright side, you no longer have to stand in the light to make it work, so there's that. Next up is Smite Infusion, which is a solid option, but it does have its flaws. It grants 100% more radiation damage to all allies in range, with this being treated as a non-combining elemental mod. The main issue with Smite Infusion is that, if an enemy survives contact with an attack that inflicts radiation, they'll stop pushing towards the objective and instead begin brawling their now former allies. This can slow the mission's pace to a crawl, though it doesn't matter much if the enemy dies in one hit. Shock Trooper is, in my opinion, a direct upgrade from Smite Infusion when it comes to this strategy. It works identically to Smite Infusion mechanically, but it grants electric damage instead of radiation, which is huge. This nets you a multi-target DOT on the turrets, which is very helpful for dealing with crowds. As it inflicts electric procs already, Pterodon massively benefits from this augment. It isn't the highest raw damage option though, which leads us into our next ability. Thermal Transfer was an augment that I totally forgot about in the last video, but it is exceptionally good for this strategy. This augment is for Thermal Sunder, and it makes it so that standing in Sunder's cold and heat zones grants a 75% elemental damage boost of their respective element. If you have the buff from one zone and step into the other, they'll be combined into a 150% blast damage buff. If you've seen my status tier list, you'll know that Blast is incredibly strong, and being able to grant it alongside such a high damage boost is very useful. You can also stick with just heat or cold if the situation requires it, so the flexibility is very nice. On top of that, Thermal Sunder lingers for quite a while after being cast, meaning that the duration of thermal transfer is much longer than you'd expect. This works out great because, well, the turrets aren't exactly going anywhere. My first video on this topic focused on using Wisp, as her haste motes synergize fantastically with the turrets. Not only does it make them fire faster, but the Mazuka and Gyataka are able to target enemies faster as well, which helps them both a lot. On top of that, Wisp can use her healing motes to boost the health and regen of both the exodampers and the finger, which is really useful. I do think that Wisp is still fantastic for this strategy, but after Eclipse got nerfed, her solo viability has definitely gone down. As such, we're going to be focusing on a different frame in this video, Chroma. What makes Chroma so good for this strategy is Vex Armor, which grants a massive base damage bonus to allies within 18 meters. This bonus needs to be built up by either taking health damage or getting kills with guns, with headshots doubling the amount granted. Building up Vex Armor can be a tad annoying, but as long as you recast it before its duration ends, it's very easy to maintain. Vex Armor also requires you to stand near your turrets to buff them, which limits your mobility, but it's not too bad, especially considering its high base range. I do want to note something important though. For some reason, kills from the turrets do not proc the health regeneration from Guardian Armor. It's a pretty minor thing, but I still think it's really annoying. Vex Armor and Thermal Transfer aren't the only things we're using to buff the turrets though, as the Cat's Eye precept on the Adarza also applies to the turrets, granting them a flat 60% increase in critical chance. As far as I can tell, the turrets have a 2x crit multiplier, so this buff lets them deal double damage just over half the time. It isn't strictly needed, but it's a sizable damage increase, so I'd recommend it. So then, for this video, our strategy is going to involve Chroma with Thermal Sunder subsumed over Effigy, alongside my Adarza Big Floppa 2. Don't ask what happened to the first one. I highly encourage you to experiment and find what you like best, but this particular strategy is what works best for me. All you have to do is press 3 and 4 from time to time, and your turrets will deal insane amounts of damage. The prior Wisp strategy largely relied on the Pterodon due to its incredible damage potential, but Chroma's damage boost is so high that the Mazuka is capable of killing most enemies in a couple shots, which makes it especially good in long-range environments. While I don't find myself using the Coralizer or Gyataka much, I like to use the Mazuka for long-range sightlines and the Pterodon for close-quarters areas. I also want to mention real quick that I did try amping up this strategy with stuff like Volt's Shield, the Mutalist Quanta's Bubble, and Mandinel's Laser, but all of those seem to block the turret's line of sight, which prevents them from firing at enemies. In my last video on this topic, I recommended having a weapon for killing crowds, a weapon for killing the Angel, and a weapon for supporting the turrets. This time though, the turrets deal so much damage that they can fry everything they see with ease, so feel free to just bring whatever you want. The turrets are going to be playing the game for you for the most part, so aside from the Angel's Void phases, you don't really have to worry about what you bring. Now that all of the pieces are in place, I want to explain how this strategy is actually employed in mission. Typically, I spend the whole mission in the Finger Room, as defending the exodampers can be finicky. Enemies spawn near the Finger so often that it's never really safe from damage, so I find it best to just stay near it. This has the unfortunate side effect of adding a lot of downtime though, as you have to wait for enemies to destroy the exodampers. Beyond that, I need to quickly explain the difference between the active and inactive side. Within the Fingers Room, there's a large door in the middle that will always spawn enemies, as well as 2 smaller doors to the left and right. One of the doors will be the side you spawn on, which is the inactive side, and the other door will spawn enemies, being the active side. The main doors in the middle have a much longer sightline for their turrets, so I like to build Mazukas there to snipe enemies as soon as they're visible. The side doors turret placement is much more CQC though, so I like to place Pterodons that mop up groups of enemies as soon as they walk through the door. The last noteworthy turret spot is directly in the middle of the room, as it sits right behind the Void angle when it teleports to the Finger. I like to build a Pterodon here whenever the angle becomes active, as it will quickly torch its health bar. As long as you've got a decent amp for the Void phase, or you just use Materai, then this thing shouldn't be much of a threat. That's all I'm gonna give for the overview this time. No MS Paint adventure, sorry. I do want to say though, that using Chroma as opposed to Wisp makes defending the exodampers a lot easier if you choose to go that route. Wisp's playstyle revolves around placing motes in very specific spots, so moving them was a huge pain. With Chroma though, you can throw down as many Sunders as you want, and as long as you're near a turret, it'll get Vex Armor's buff. This means that, while I don't think defending the exodampers is really optimal, he's much more flexible in that role than Wisp was. Normally in these videos, I'd show off a cool montage of things dying, but in this instance, I'd just be standing there and letting my turrets kill everything, so I hope the footage you've seen thus far will suffice. Still, these turrets become incredibly effective when using this strategy, and I think that making the turrets buff eligible was a great decision from a development standpoint. The turrets add such a unique dimension to the gameplay experience, especially with how many buffs work on them, and I adore that. At the same time though, I do think that Armageddon has its problems, and it's an unpopular mode for a good reason. It's slow, it's finicky, and the rewards it drops just aren't that good. As such, I'm gonna do something very different for the end of this video, an Armageddon Rework concept. This doesn't really have much to do with the whole overpowered thing, but I thought it would be fun to talk about. My proposal for an Armageddon Rework is to do away with the round system entirely. Instead of rounds, each reward rotation is now a continuously spawning wave of enemies attacking one exodamper. This onslaught will last for 3 minutes, and once those 3 minutes are up, the Void Angel will spawn. The Angel will try to destroy the exodamper, and if it succeeds, it'll move on to the finger like normal. If the exodamper dies at any point before the Angel spawns, players will also be pushed back into the finger room, as you might expect. Killing the Angel will drop a Void Plume Quill and grant a reward like it does now, and then the next wave will start at another exodamper. I'd also make it so that, while an exodamper is under attack, all other defense objectives are made invincible, including the finger. This would prevent stragglers from destroying stuff that isn't the current focus, as I've always found that super annoying. This is kind of less important, but I'd also add a third exodamper just to improve gameplay variety. You'll be spending prolonged amounts of time in each individual exodamper tile, so having a third one would help spice things up. Because you'll be spending more time near each exodamper, I'd also change the turrets so that, instead of being duration-based, they'll instead remain active for the entire round. As a failsafe, players will be given the ability to deconstruct a turret by interacting with it for a few seconds, just in case you end up wanting to replace it. In addition to these mechanical changes, I'd also add new things to be purchased with Argozene. A new batch of turrets would be fun, and we could fill in niches that aren't really present currently, like a grenade turret that leaves lingering patches of fire, a railgun turret that prioritizes high-value targets like Eximus units, or maybe even some kind of beacon that doesn't deal damage but draws enemy attention. I'd also add Argozene fortifications to the exodampers themselves, allowing you to buy things like a bubble shield, a slow aura, or maybe even mirror defense systems like the prismatic gem, Charinka pillar, or even a unique one like an arc sphere or something. I'd also allow players to purchase an item that increases the rate at which the mission timer ticks down, but in exchange, the exodamper's debuff activates for the entire wave. This way, players could speed up the mission considerably, but with that comes the risk of being overwhelmed. Speaking of debuffs, exodampers currently only have 6 of them, so I'd add a new batch of those as well. We could have things like increasing Eximus spawns, spawning groups of Thrax units, granting enemies more damage types, or even more out there debuffs like restricting orb and ammo drops. So what are my goals with this rework? Well, for one, I want to renew focus on actually defending the exodampers. This is a big part of why I want waves to be time-based instead of kills-based, as it would open up the door to more strategies than just room nuking. I also want to add a third exodamper to both further solidify this focus and improve gameplay variety. Armageddon is also a very slow mode in its current state, and having a 3-minute defense phase on top of the 40-second prep phase and, say, minute-long boss fight would put it in a decent spot. I think that adding an opt-in to increase the mission speed and difficulty would be a great way to offset making this mode time-based, letting players with strong builds and teamwork speedrun each reward rotation. I also want to add a new batch of purchasables to both improve gameplay variety and make Argozene feel more impactful. As it stands, the turrets aren't great without builds that focus on buffing them, and while I don't want to buff the turrets so much that they play the game for you with zero investment, I think that adding more turret types and making them last longer will both go a long way in improving their impact. This extends to my idea to add purchasables to the exodampers themselves, which would make Argozene a much more interesting resource as you'd have a lot more options to weigh. Do I think this will ever actually be implemented? Nope, I'm the only person who even likes this game mode, but I thought it was a fun idea, so I wanted to talk about it. Alright, unsolicited rambling aside, that's it for today's video. Combine Vex Armor, Thermal Transfer, Summoner's Wrath, and Cat's Eye for huge turret damage that will have you playing the game as Pablo intended. If you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you left a like, and if you want to see more garbage, then go ahead and subscribe. You're also welcome to leave a dislike if you think this video is ass, but be warned, I will send a photon strike to your house. Who am I kidding, no one can afford a house anymore. Feel free to let me know what you think of this strategy in the comments, as well as any other ability combos that you like using with the turrets. I also have a Discord you can join if you think Sanity is for chumps, and I stream right here on YouTube if you want to stop by. I also want to give a huge thank you to all of my channel members, whose names you've been seeing on screen. I'm only able to run this channel full-time because of their support, so seriously, thank you. Beyond that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time when the ravenous Boyd Angle breaks into my house looking for beans.